The Education of OverSoul7 by Jane Roberts. Read by Martin John. Chapter 19. The Speaker's Dream Tribunal, Maha. Sumter slipped out of his body easily and stood up. He always felt more truly alive and alert, lighter and more exuberant when he cast his physical body off. Not that the earth form wasn't marvelous, he thought, because it was, and he couldn't manipulate in the environment without it. Still, he felt more in his natural element whenever he slipped out of his skin. Maha was on the couch. He went in, moving quietly in the moonlight that splashed through the window. Her body was sleeping, but Maha was obviously gone, her form showing that particular vacancy that was apparent when the person consciousness deserted it. Well, he had plenty of time, and he had a good idea where she was. Smiling, he remembered the nights that he'd followed her down to the courtyard and found her studying the cave drawings and inscriptions. In the morning she never recalled their meetings, though now her dream memory was improving constantly. Still, as he left his quarters, he wondered how she would respond at the dream tribunal, and what they learned. An unaccustomed nervousness was at him. She obviously knew so much and yet so little. He had the feeling that the tribunal would discover information of great import to all of them. But as he went along, his native sensitivity drowned out his speculations. The night was so perfect that he felt honored to be a part of it. He paused by the private dwellings. The speakers' bodies were all sleeping, men, women, and children alike. But the speakers themselves were up and about. The adults would soon be heading for the dream tribunal, having just finished the children's nightly dream training, and the children were playing. Groups of them went rushing by, playing tag, and Sumter grinned indulgently as he watched. The children ran laughing and shouting in their dream bodies, straight through trees, usually the biggest ones they could find, emerging gleefully on the other side. Their games reminded him of his own early training, the joy of learning to use the dream body and the great freedom of discarding the physical one. Then, of course, there was the contrast, equally delightful, of slipping back into the physical form. As children, they used to compare the two bodies for hours at a time. He found Maha at the courtyard as usual. He approached slowly, calling out when he was some distance away. She still had some difficulty in controlling her consciousness when she was out of her body, and he didn't want to startle her. "Who is it?" she asked, turning. "Sumter." "Oh, funny. I thought it might be the old man. You might even see him before the night is out." "What makes you say that? Do you know something I don't?" she asked. "Besides, this is another dream, isn't it?" He paused. It might be best if she thought that the whole thing was just a dream, at least for a while. "You might call it that," he said, "but there's some place I want you to go. I told you that most of the speaker's real work was done at night, and this evening the tribunal is being held. I want you to go with me, and please try to remember what's happening." She shrugged. "A dream is only a dream. I'll stay in this one as long as it's happy." Laughing, she took his arm as she never did in the day, and they walked down the path together. At least Sumter walked down the path. Maha still bobbed along. Sometimes her feet were on the ground, and sometimes she floated gently above it. A few more children passed, and she frowned. "Look at them. They navigate better than I do. This is like learning to walk all over again." "Just tell yourself that you want to stay on the ground, then forget it," Sumter said. "That might work for you, but I keep bobbing." "You're trying too hard. Forget it," he said. "If you were in your physical body, you probably wouldn't even see those children, The place would look empty." "Will I remember any of this in the morning?" she asked. "Anyway, do you think I will? I'm getting better. During the day, bits and pieces of our dream activities keep returning." "I hope you will," Sumter said. "Tonight's tribunal is very important, and I've tried to prepare you for it." They were nearly at their destination. The robed speakers were congregating in a small natural cup of the valley. Seeing them, Maha said, "They're part of my dream, then. What's happening now is an event. A dream event is as real as a so-called waking one. You know that." Maha nodded. But the colorful robes of the speakers blended with the landscape, and now and then one of the figures would disappear, then reemerge. She shook her head and blinked. "Your consciousness is fluctuating," Sumter cautioned. "Remember what you learned a few nights ago. Get the feel of your consciousness again. Mentally swing it around until this entire scene comes into clear focus. Then hold it." She did as he directed, grinning up at him because the instructions worked so beautifully when she remembered to follow them. Now she could make out the individual faces of the men and women who seated themselves on the grassy banks of the circular hill. Sumter walked over to the center of the natural arena and stood there. Maha sat down to his left. The people quieted, and Sumter began to speak. He said, "It's written that all events occur at once, and as speakers we know this. Yet past, present, and future seem to exist. So a prophecy has come down through the ages in our records about a woman who would come into our midst from the outside. She would learn our customs with great rapidity and be a pivot point of energy in a way that even she would not understand. Her actions would deeply affect our work, opening up new probabilities that would appear in Earth time as it is experienced, pulling together the future and the past. She is here, now, among us. Of this I am confident." He was silent for a moment. The speakers stirred expectantly. Sumter went on, with a certain dryness. "She has mated with one of us. Our stock will be reflected through hers. Though she appears in this present time as predicted in the apparent past, we know that in other terms this has already happened, and yet is still to occur. So what we discover here will affect all other realities and times in which we are in any way involved." He paused, looking into the faces of his people. "Many of you have met Maha in day life, or in our dream training periods. She's learning our ways very quickly, as predicted, and before coming here she had some basic understanding of out-of-body consciousness, an unusual achievement for one of her background. But many important questions remain unanswered. and these I hope can be resolved before the tribunal is over." Sumter turned to Maha. "Will you tell them how you came here? Tell them how you found the cave, the part of the story that you didn't understand yourself and only remembered recently." She stood up slowly, suspicious, quite stunned. "You're saying that I was meant to come here? Why didn't you say something to me about this?" "I wasn't sure until yesterday," he said soberly, "and according to the prediction, you weren't told until the tribunal was held." Maha looked out at the speakers. Now they seemed to blend with the trees that dotted the hillside, or sometimes they disappeared back into the grass itself. She tried to readjust the focus of her consciousness. Again, everything came into clear, brilliant focus, and she found herself speaking. "I can't remember much," she said. "Rampa and I were half frozen. We wandered too far that day, and I knew we had to find some kind of shelter. Then something like a dream happened. I kept feeling as if the old man was talking in my head, giving me instructions, telling me to go in a certain direction. I've told Sumter about him. I used to see him when I was out of my body. He helped watch for me before I came here. I don't know why I haven't seen him since, unless he knows that my body's safe here when I leave it. Somehow through him, I knew there was a refuge nearby. When we got to the cave, I fell asleep or fainted, and when I came to, Rampa and I were both inside. The two-faced door," the words rushed up almost in chorus from the speakers. "What does that mean?" she asked. "It's symbolic, but also quite practical," Sumter answered. "The door that leads inward or outward. We have several secret entrances and exits to our territory. They're almost impossible to just come upon, but I'll explain that to you later. Tell about your experience the day you ran up the stairs of the third pyramid." "All I can remember is—" Maha broke off. Portions of the trees began to fall apart and fly away. She felt dizzy. The images of the speakers began to disintegrate at the edges, and her side vision kept closing until all she could see was a circle of light surrounded by darkness. Involuntarily, she yelled out. "It's all right. Don't be frightened," she heard Sumter speak, but couldn't find him. "I'm right in front of you," he said. "You've lost your focus again. That's all. Relax. Don't worry." His voice reassured her. For a moment she felt held in a soft blackness. Sumter said, "You know what to do. Feel around now with your consciousness until you begin to see us." She gasped. The scene instantly cleared. The speakers were smiling and nudging each other. "She's still learning," Sumter said. "I'm back in the dream again," she said, astonished. "Remember, dreams are events as real as waking ones," Sumter said. "Now, the pyramid." "Pyramid?" She'd forgotten. "Tell about climbing the stairs of the pyramid," he said gently. "Why can't we do all this in the day, with my usual consciousness?" she asked, suddenly irritated. "One kind of consciousness is as normal as the other," Sumter said, "and this way we'll be able to find out far more, as you'll see. Now go on." "I was with Sumter, and I saw the 3 pyramids. Only then I didn't know what they were. Then again I fell into a dream or something like one. When I came to, I was standing way up the stairs that led to the top of the middle pyramid, and I was scared to death because I'd never been up so high. Then I realized that the old man had done it somehow. The pyramid was familiar to him, but not to me. But even this vanished from my memory until a few days ago, when I suddenly remembered it again. When she finished speaking, there was such a silence that Maha was frightened. Though she still saw the speakers, she had the oddest feeling that they'd withdrawn in some way that she couldn't fathom, or disappeared into some inner dimension where she couldn't follow. Disconcerted, she turned to Sumter and stared. The same thing had happened to him, or he was causing it to happen. All those people there, in plain sight, and she felt completely alone. "We just switched our awareness to another level for a moment," Sumter said. "Forgive us. It isn't very courteous, but it was necessary. We've decided to tell you more about the prediction and see if you can help us." Maha frowned. "It wasn't my imagination then. Well, it frightened me. I'm going back into my body and forget the whole thing. What good is it if I hold my consciousness at the right level and you go off someplace else?" Some of the speakers smiled. She glowered back at them. "It's uncomfortable being with people who know more than you do all the time," she said angrily. "No one is trying to make you feel inferior," Sumter said softly. "You aren't. You're more important, and your presence here is more important than you know. Try to understand. You didn't come here accidentally. It's probably no coincidence that you were even in the area. You were led here. By whom? You ran unerringly to the third pyramid, stopping just outside the invisible third door. Its real significance is known only to a few speakers. And there's more," he said. "In our records, it's also written that the woman would have a twin, a psychic one, of the other sex. We don't believe that he's the old man. From talking to Rampa, we don't think he's the one either. So we have two questions. Do you have any idea who the twin could be? And what do you know about the old man?" She looked sideways at him, grinning. "You didn't tell me that you talked to Rampa about this. Anyhow, I don't know the answer to either question. I know that this is an important dream event, and I'm determined to remember it, but I don't see how all this is connected." "Neither do we yet," Sumter said. "Maha, can you find the old man? Have you ever called him?" "I never went looking for him. I wouldn't know where to look or how. But why is it so important?" "Learning the answer to that question is part of the importance." Her eyes widened. Suddenly she felt frightened again, but excited at the same time. "Wait," she cried. "I do remember something else. The other day in the courtyard, I thought I heard someone call my name. No one was there. For a moment I felt it was the old man's voice. Is that any help?" "It might be. Perhaps the courtyard is a focal point." He touched her hand and imagined the courtyard. Instantly they were there. Maha was aware only of a whirl of sound like wind rustling through very dry grass. They'd traveled that way before when out of their bodies, but it always confused her. Now she rubbed her eyes and looked about. The speakers stood on the sidelines, so that their figures seemed to blend with the drawings on the cliffs, as if the people themselves constantly moved in and out of the stone. The moonlight was brilliant and the tiles glittered. "Think of the old man. Keep him in your mind," Sumter said. She tried to do as he directed, but there was no response, and unaccountably she became frightened again. "Maybe he's gone, or in trouble," she said. "Just keep thinking of him, picture him," Sumter said. None of the other speakers made a sound. To Maha it seemed that the whole world was waiting. Then she said calmly, "Lydia is dying." The sound of her voice startled her. "What did I say? Did I say that? Who's Lydia? Sumter, I'm frightened. What are we trying to do? What's happening? What do you hope to find?" Then she felt as if she was falling steadily downward. The last thing she remembered was Sumter's voice saying, "Don't worry, I'll follow you if I can." Then the scene vanished. She was tumbling, helpless, it seemed, into darkness. In Chapter 19. Peace, light, and love. Aloha.